You are a spiritual being in physical form, a dichotomy of light and dark, where energy equals mass on a journey designed to fulfill our personal legend and purpose, to use humanity throughout, to amplify and transcend, slay the ego, raise the humanity. That's a signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the High Vibe Zone. Hello.
Hello.
This is the first High Vibe Zone of 2022.
I was going to say, I think this is the first one.
I wasn't sure if I wanted to do High Vibe Zone in January, just coming back into everything, but I think this is a very nice one to talk about since we got some stuff going on.
Indeed. I think we were both just out of hibernation the past few weeks.
Yes. Yeah. What was your highlight?
I think, so every year my family and I go to camp out at Big Bend National Park in the desert. And so I think the highlight was just spending time with my family. The four of us just laugh hysterically all the time. On New Year's, we spent it in a tent because there was a storm, and we were talking about our story, immigrating to the US, and it was just a really special time being together. I know, like, your family is really close too, so I'm sure both of us feel that family was a highlight.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's really awesome. And laughter is, speaking of family, it's like very loud here, but laughter is really, really key. As you know, baby Mikey's birthday was on Christmas Day, so that was a big kind of thing, which is awesome. But yeah, going into hibernation was really, really awesome. And for those that are watching the High Vibe Zone, I hope you had a wonderful holiday season, and thank you for being here with us, whether you're watching live or the replay. We want to know what you're grateful for, where you're joining us from. We're gonna have a great conversation, Maria and I. Maria, you've been on the High Vibe Zone a few times. I'd love for you to reintroduce. There you are. Reintroduce yourself, just for those that are watching, and then I think we should get into our topic today.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. I love the High Vibe Zone. I think it's a very positive, thoughtful corner of the internet. So if you're here, welcome. I'm Maria, and I work alongside Charisse at Culture Circle. And I do a lot of our business development, strategy, a lot of the creative aspects as well, and just connections with a lot of our client partners. So do a lot of the background, the fun work in the background, and then doing the High Vibe Zone as well. But we always have such insightful conversations here, so I'm excited for today.
Awesome. I am excited as well. And just for y'all that may be joining in, I'm Charisse Fonts, and I'm human, and that's it. I do a lot of other things, but I am human. That is where I want to keep it right now. But let's get into how to become a racist Q&A.
Drum roll.
I'm crying in the background. Go. Someone's always crying in this house on something. It's not me, Charlotte. Just, it's a lot of life in this house.
There you go. There's a lot of life, and plant life in the background.
And plant life, yes. Oh my gosh. I watered all of them today. I just love them.
Lovely.
Yes.
Well, I think it's interesting if we start this conversation for people watching on LinkedIn and maybe not listening, but just reading that first bubble right there, how to become a racist. I wonder what people are thinking, because the name of this special thing, which is this workshop series that you have, the name is very powerful. And I think at first glance, someone might be like reading it twice, like, what do you mean how to become a racist? Right. But I think, and we've talked about it before, a lot of the power of this title comes in how to become, because it's in the becoming. It's not that one simply just wakes up and decides to be racist one day. So I'd love for you to share with anybody who's listening what's up with the title. Why is that word become so important, and why is the history of humanity's relationship with that word important, and how that comes through with this conversation?
Yes. So to give this story background, this all started in 2020 after George Floyd was killed. I was brought in to certain companies to hold space for conversations. And these are people that I had worked with in the past or just had known about how I'm open with discussions and, they just needed someone to come in and hold space. And what was interesting was the word racism was thrown around a lot in these spaces. And when I had debriefed with a CEO that had me lead a group, he had mentioned, I didn't know what racism was until you explained it. And that kind of hit me because I'm like, interesting. He mentioned that his kids who were in their 20s were pretty upset with him around just how his response was, and just there was just a lot going on there. And I just thought to myself, I was like, how can someone not know? And that led this question of, well, then how does someone become racist? And I remember sitting down thinking about that question, and I was like, Saturday morning, I was like, all right, Sharice, go be racist. Like, go. Like, where do I start? I just didn't have any reference point. And then again, that question, how do you become a racist? And so I started asking my neighbors, and their answers were, or you're taught, or you learn, or they were just they weren't wrong answers. They just weren't satisfying answers. Like, I was really looking for this root. And so you're right in the sense of becoming. We're all becoming something. And as a birth doula, I've seen so many births, and we aren't born racist. So at what point in our journey do we become racist? Like, where does that happen, if that happens at all? And so I was on this mission to discover this. So I used my anthropology hat and used some history, and I just started digging through history. And I was like, I want to create a workshop about how you become racist, because I want to show the journey from birth to racism. And I really want to outline something to give people to think about when they are going through their day to day. Because again, it is in the becoming that we miss out on realizing it's these little things that happen. It's the hate that settles in. It's the bitterness that comes in. And before you know it, you have become something that you are like, I never wanted to be, or how did I get here? That intentionality with our becoming is not something that we spend a lot of quiet time with. And so there's a lot of, in addition to racism, because in this workshop, I don't just talk racism, I talk about these other isms, because they're all disempowering, they're all causing harm to our humanity. And so the same energy that's used to dissect this racism is the same energy that's used to talk around these other isms. So that answers the first question. And then I don't remember the second part to your question. If you can repeat it.
No, I think that flowed really well. I think you answered it in a way, because the way how you came about to create this workshop was based on curiosity, and I think that's what a lot of people might have. But I think the way that you dug into it, asking the question, it's not what is racism now 100 years ago. It's peeling back the layers, because it has been around without having ever been called that for ever since the beginning of time. And having taken the workshop, it's like we peel back the layers in a way that color is removed, because racism, as you say, isn't a black and white issue, it's a humanity issue. And that has come through with so many aspects. And so a lot of modern day companies, people, leaders, and people who are really trying to learn and want to better the world, I think sometimes we forget to peel back the layers that far, which is why what you have created is so special. And that actually gives me another question, because people are trying to actively learn about racism and how we help end it, even though it is a very complex issue. And a lot of people turn to books and turn to podcasts and other things. But you've said to me before that as humans, we already know in our hearts what humanity is and how we can do better. So how does this workshop, how would you explain that this workshop helps people go through that and really tap into our own consciousness, rather than just simply turning to books or stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And great question, because when I created this workshop, I didn't have the mindset of like, I'm going to go change your mind and I'm going to change this and I'm going to change that. All I wanted to do was plant a seed of something different in different soil, because the narratives that are out there don't transcend. They just stay where they are. And if we're to get to this other space, they need to transcend. So for anyone that is interested in being able to be a part of the evolution of our humanity, our higher consciousness, which leaves these isms behind, this workshop gives multiple, it's almost like a crystalline light, multiple dimensions and areas and tools and techniques to not only be able to hold space for a conversation around racism or when you see something happening, but it also gives you, it attunes the heart to the area in which the human is going. And it is nothing aggressive. It is not calling out a certain ethnicity. It's really just laying out in the simplest form where anyone can tap in and say, okay, I understand this, I can see this. And then really empowering people that are taking this workshop to look at it from a lens of where they can step in and make impact if they are ready and when they want to. I would say over 70 attendees have taken this workshop, and it's really fascinating to see the light bulb moments and, oh wow, that is really simple, and how I've been indulging in a lot of material that isn't helping me transcend. It's keeping me where I am. I am angry. When I read this, I don't feel good. And not saying that this is a feel good, fuzzy workshop, but it's very much going in the opposite direction of the momentum that we don't want to see happening in our world. And so whoever takes this workshop, just know that it's literally the seeds that are being planted, and it's different than what the narratives have been told. Like you said, racism is not a black and white issue. It is something that has been around for centuries, and it started even before race was created. And so it's, if you were to put it in context, it's was started before then. But what I find really interesting again about this workshop is the same way we address racism is the same way we can address ageism, ableism, sexism, classism, and colorism. And what I find that's out there right now is a lot of these materials that are accessible to people only focus on that one thing, and it's not transcending us to that next level. It's just kind of like repeating a scene in a movie that just goes over and over again, but we're like, we don't want to be in this scene anymore. Well, here's some different information, and this workshop does that.
Love it. Thank you for sharing. And building off of that, I think it sparks the conversation of, can we actually end racism as the big picture? But I think you answered that question yourself. We're just planting seeds, and we know that this work is in our lifetime not going to be done. But if for those who attend, it is like a light bulb switch of realizing that, oh, things that I do in my daily life, unconsciously, consciously, things like bias, things like stereotypes, there's ways we can work on that. And you teach us the Otis and the Bianca in those workshops too. And it like you said, it's not fuzzy, but it doesn't make you, it's not like a guilt trip. And I think it's actually the complete opposite. I think it gives you hope, and it gives you just a different mindset, a philosophy, I guess we could call
Yeah.
it, that makes it more digestible and just more logical.
Yeah.
I think with the topics of all of the isms, I think we're forgetting the logic sometimes. It is actually staring at us right in the face. And you are also the author of a children's book. So I think that, I wonder if that has
Mm.
added, like, made this workshop just like simplifies everything so much that it's so easy to
Hmm.
understand.
Yes, I want to, I love that you bring up children's books because in fact when I think it was last year when we talked when because we do a lot of work with companies around building out what they call DEI and where we call it humanity and inclusion areas. And they're like, what do we read during Black History Month? And I'm like, read children's books because things are actually very simple. It is our egos and fear and anxiety and doubt and um, things like that that add this layer of complication or complexity to the thing. I mean, if you look at nature, it's simple. It's just very simple how it all works, and we are naturally like that. And while it's not like, oh, it's so easy like this way, but to simplify something really brings us back to the question that we forgot we were asking in the first place. And I think that's a lot of what is happening right now. And with all of the work, especially around DEI, people are forgetting the question that they initially started to ask, which is how can we bring humanity, humans back together to center? You don't do it by lining everyone up and telling them, hey, check your privilege. You don't do it by segregating and separating people. You don't do it by those ways. And so we forget the question, the logic behind it. I think children's books are a great way to kind of bring us back to center, a great way to explain things, especially like I think about whenever my husband and I do this. If we get in an argument or something's bothering us, we go to elementary. We're like, when this happened, I felt like this. And people are just like, oh, wow, that's so basic and simple. But at the same time, the alternative is when you did this and then that, blah, blah, it like builds momentum in the wrong direction. Whereas it like, if you can go very simple, it's like very general, we start to slow the momentum down. And then we can actually see which direction are we going with that. But rarely in our society, especially with the news and some of that stuff, it's just keeping the momentum going faster and faster. And people are getting wrapped up in that and not realizing, wait, we need to slow this down to see which direction we are going. It's very important for folks to realize that the oppressed can soon be the oppressor in some of these areas. And how do we know if that's happening if we're not taking a step back? Um, Children's books are a great a way to articulate and illustrate the simplicity of our humanity. Humanity the Manatee does that for kids. The first book talks around what is humanity and what does it look like? What does it sound like? And it's a really easy concept because interesting enough, if we were to take some of the simple stuff from the book, we can say in this moment, am I being humanity? Am I talking to someone with humanity? Did I just treat that person with humanity? Like very simple questions. Even my daughter, she's like, "Oh, that's not humanity," and I'm like, "Oh." It's actually interesting because that's what I really wanted to convey when I wrote the book was like, okay, the parents are gonna have to, or the caregivers or the teachers are gonna have to read the book to the kids. And I envisioned like a parent driving or a caregiver driving and like maybe cutting someone off and their kid saying that wasn't humanity. And it's so funny because Charlotte does that in this house. She's like, that's not humanity. And it's like, oh, you are right. That was not humanity. And it just gives you a moment to pause and reflect.
It really personifies such what we make it a complex topic. Like, how do you personify that exact example of someone cutting you off? That is such a great way to do that. And it's gentle and it's not aggressive, because I think something else you highlighted there is the importance of the power of words, and how in this workshop specifically, we don't talk about minority or privilege or anti-racism. Those words, as you explain, are more low vibrational, and not to say that the words that we use are, again, light and fluffy, but it's like psychologically, words like that actually don't move the needle forward in what we're actually trying to accomplish, which is that acting with humanity.
Right.
So can we talk a little bit about the philosophy or the language that you use in this workshop?
Yes. So we've done a few high vibe zones on language. There's one, maybe we can link it in the comments. It's say the N word, I'll say it with you. And it's essentially where we talk around how in a lot of the DEI or anti-racism work, the words that are used are very low vibrational, as in they're not transcending. There's a lot of momentum that's built up. And again, like I said, in order to know which direction you're going or to have an intentional direction, you need to slow things down. I use the example in the live around minorities where I brought in baby Mikey, and I was like, how would it feel if I'm like introducing like, hey, little minority, like I would be floored if someone introduced their like child to me as that. But we refer and you know, we wouldn't say about someone that we love, we shouldn't be using that word for someone that deserves just as much love. It's not an empowering word at all, and it's sprinkled everywhere. And in this workshop, we have taken words that are adopted heavily by society and are very much attached to stereotypes and labels. And we found a way to find a word that's transcending, where it now takes you to another place. It allows you to be on a different path in terms of your way of perception and thinking. Now, one of the things I think about often is, using words like anti-racism or minorities or, I don't know, whatever words that kind of anti-racism, things like that. Those are ground level. Like, I'm not saying I've never used those words in conversation, but it's not, it's a ground level, it's a base. Don't stay there. If we're to go better, it's almost like once you start working out, you kind of up level your workouts from there because you're like going to that next level. This is very similar to that. Don't stay in those spaces because it's not going to transcend. But if you're starting there, start there. But know that there's a bigger, higher vision for where we're going. And those words don't really play a part in that future. Again, like you said, psychologically, our brains don't listen to the intent behind the words. It just looks at the word and then it directs it there. And anti-racism are two negatives that don't equal a positive. I've written a few articles about that as well. And so what you'll find from this workshop is not only the language is different, but if you were to take this language and have a conversation with somebody around racism or any of the isms, it will translate really, really well. Many times people have come back and said, I was able to have the conversation I was not able to have last year because of this workshop. And that's really key because that influences it's planting the seeds for someone else and someone else. And once you get that light bulb moment, it's like coming out of the matrix. You're just like, wait a minute, something is happening and it's different. And so it's a really good way to just get another introduction to language. And if you don't like it, you can always go back to the other way. That's totally fine. So
yeah, no, I think it like rewires your brain into seeing things differently, because then you realize what has been working for you all along. And you realize that this is a conversation you could have with a 10-year-old, because it doesn't have to be this like conversation that pins people against each other, because that has the opposite effect that we actually want. And the other thing that came to mind is that a lot of people and companies and organizations using the word diversity, but if we think about it, a lot of the teachings from this workshop remind us that diversity doesn't solve racism. It's important to peel back the layers, because the first part of the workshop, so it's 3 parts, right? And so the first one is the history of it, peeling back the layers. The second aspect, which I think is really important, are the stereotypes and the bias. And I think if we're able to understand those and able to identify when we're using them, reel us back, and like notice when we're using them, then the next step becomes action. And I think perhaps a lot of people start in the action and forget the previous.
Yes.
So that's why the 3 parts of the workshop are equally important. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah, I agree. And something that else that I want to say is, usually when folks take this workshop, they have exhausted a lot of their options on the anti-racism. They're tired, they're burnt out. They're like, why is nothing changing? I'm not making an impact. This is that, I'm just kind of like, I'm here and I'm exhausted and I'm tired and I don't feel good. And then they realize there was another way.
Ding, ding, ding.
There's another way. And I've heard it so many times where people are like, wait a minute, this is way less path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is what's being taught in this workshop for sustainable, impacted change, true change and transformation, and then transcendence into this next level. And it's, I've been doing this since 2020. I haven't gotten exhausted at all. I mean, I'm human, so I'm tired, but not from this, not talking about this, because it's the language, the intent, the flow, the vibration. I'm tapped into another area that really allows me to be grounded and hold space for wherever people are. That's another thing. All different types of people come to this workshop. We've done it for companies, done it for individuals, people that are experts in areas, and everyone has walked away with something. And again, my goal is not to change the mind. My goal is to plant the seeds in the heart and let the work go from there.
Yeah, no, you said it beautifully. And from having attended the workshop, it's like I never experienced draining or like fatigue from these conversations, which are generally labeled as the heavy conversations. It has none of that. It actually has the complete opposite effect. Especially when we've done it with companies, it's so great to see people bond with each other in such positive, like humanity ways without it being forced at all. It's like it just comes naturally, and that's really magical. And that is proof that, this philosophy and different way of thinking actually works. And so from a company perspective, seeing people interact that way is really special. And then from an individual, since individuals can, join this as well, it's being with people who you've never met in a room before and seeing all your differences, and then suddenly seeing all of the similarities, and, being able to create that sort of balance between both. So it's really, this workshop is for any and everybody. Whether you're a 10-year-old, you would get as much out of it as any adult would as well, and vice versa.
Yeah, I agree. No, I really do hope that, as we're launching it in February, that more go ahead and sign up for this workshop, invest their heart into this workshop, their time and their energy, because I will tell you, you will walk away with another lens on life. And so I agree. We have a comment. Let's see. What do we have? Thank you. I remember when I said I'll never refer to myself as a minority again, and I'm so overhearing it. What alternatives do you recommend for anti-racism? Because there is a lot of recent articles and organizations now promoting it.
Ooh, what a great question.
Thank you. Yes, I love this question. Thank you so much. So we've had these questions and conversations before. It's like, what's the alternative to minority? What's the alternative to anti-racism. I don't in this moment recall what I had said, but I think
so you had written an article actually titled "Why Being an Anti-Racist Company Won't End Racism." So I'm happy to link that in the comments as well.
Yes, maybe I dropped the answer in there because in this moment, the way that I'm the way what I am and thank you so much for this question, Alicia, because I want to say that they are on the alternative is on such a different playing field than what's being said that I don't necessarily have an immediate other word, if that makes sense. It's like there's it's like anti-racism, there is no comparison to the alternative because in the alternative there's a whole nother, I guess the best way I can say is like dimension to what's happening. So it's I don't have the word in this moment, but hopefully the article that Maria dropped in would be helpful because just like when someone says, what is the, I mean, for minorities, human, right? That one is easy for me. It's just like, okay. But when I look at anti-racism, because there's, those are two words that they're really heavy in the sense of they're not very positive words. I don't have the balance to that one yet, unless I put it in the article. But in this moment, I don't have the answer. I guess actually, when I think about it, by a company or someone saying I'm anti-racist usually means that they're against racism. And something that we've talked about a lot is it takes way more energy to be against something than to stand for something. And so I guess the alternative is we're for humanity. And this is what humanity looks like. It's kind, it's inclusive, it recognizes and appreciates others, it celebrates differences, it holds space for the journey of the human because they're not linear, they're lunar. So I think that's how I would answer your question. What's the alternative to anti-racism is we are for humanity. We are for the human. We are for this dichotomy of the experience that we're all going through together. And if companies came at it from a more positive lens, you wouldn't even need the word anti-racism. It's like there's so much there that can really transcend once you use the better languages, if that makes sense. So if I went to somebody's website and they were like, we are for humanity and that's what this means, versus we're racist and this is what that means. Because when you say we're for humanity, that captures all the isms that are causing this issue. They would have to give out maybe 20 more statements to cover the stuff that is in the anti bucket, whereas for humanity, you got one and it just covers all of it. So hopefully that answers your question, Alicia. Thank you.
I went ahead and linked those articles, but I think you nailed it. Anti-racism are two negative words trying to transcend a negative problem, which is, I think, what you said in one of your articles. So it's a double negative. So where are we getting with that? And the other part of the problem is exactly what you said there. If we're saying we're anti-racist, are we also being anti-ableism, anti-colorism? All the isms, like, do we have to do like that? Just becomes overwhelming. And that's why people working in DEI and regular people who maybe aren't doing that actively, it's overwhelming and it's hard. It does become hard to have those conversations, which shouldn't be. So I think the philosophy of humanity that you bring with how to become a racist and all of your other workshops and the work that we're doing with Culture Circle is actually just the opposite of the draining.
Right.
And I think it just makes things less overwhelming, which I think is part of the problem.
Yeah, I agree. That makes a lot of sense. Pro affirming language. Ari, awesome. You're very welcome. And let me know if you have any questions. Happy to have the conversation further. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot there. And for companies that have already put out anti-racism statements and have already done, like, you can change at any point. Again, while we are not, like, this is not a linear thing. You can have awe moments and be like, you know what? I used to think, now I know. You can have those moments. You're allowed. It's just, what's the intent behind them? A lot of the intent behind the anti-racism statements were not very good intents. It was kind of monkey see, monkey do. And there was really, not much there. So just, I really do hope that, folks will see this and even check out the workshop and just know that there's a lot more on the other side of some of this. And if you're really looking to make impact, again, not just within the transcending of racism, but just in your own life, you will be changed. You will see certain areas. It is such a great way to just take a moment and really level set. So, yeah.
Thank you. No, I think that's a great way to sum it all up. It's not a hard problem, it's a heart problem. And that's something we definitely talk about in the workshop. So
Yes.
Thank you for sharing. I'm like re-energized and I can't wait for the workshop.
Yes, I'm excited too. For those that are interested, Maria, you got the dates on hand?
I do. So our next round of workshops are in February, and it is, again, a 3-part series. So it's February 10th, 17th, and 24th. We can link the registration on the comments below as well. But yeah, so it's those 3 dates. And if you can please make it to all 3, that way you can get all of the goodies.
Yes, very much so. Well, thank you so much, Maria, for holding the space. And thank you for everyone that has joined live and on the replay as we talked about how to become a racist Q&A. If you have any follow-up questions for me, just let me know. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me. Well, definitely. Or Maria, you can always follow up with her as well. We're both there. But thank you so much for being with us here in the High Vibe Zone, where we take topics to the high vibe. So thank you, Maria. So grateful for you in this moment, the first High Vibe Zone of 2022.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for bringing this workshop to life. I think people will get a lot out of it.
You're welcome. And with that, we are going to play our outro. Have a beautiful rest of your day, evening, week, month, 2022, all the things, y'all. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a great rest of your time.
Bye.
Bye. You are a spiritual being in physical form, a dichotomy of light and dark, where energy equals mass on a journey designed to fulfill our personal legend and purpose, to use humanity throughout to amplify and transcend, slay the ego, raise the humanity. That's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the High Vibe Zone.